Welcome to Always for Black Radio. I'm your moderator for tonight, Malik, and on this call we have Soul and the lovely Miss Baba. Of course, for us, BLACK is an acronym meaning building lives and awareness through conscious knowledge. On the show tonight, we will be discussing violence in our communities. This is definitely a topic that the news and media is currently highlighting. It's something that all Americans are concerned about. But this issue is something that has always been a reality and a topic of importance to black people living in America. Alright, to hop right into the conversation, we're going to first discuss an aspect of this history. And I'm going to shoot this over to Miss Baba to discuss. So, alright, Miss Baba, are you surprised that some people in America, and even some black people, are reacting to these current events as if targeting black people is some recent phenomenon?
Thank you so much for that, Malik. And to answer your question simply, the answer is no. I am not surprised. But I did want to go ahead and take advantage of this opportunity and delve a little bit deeper to provide a historical context. And in doing so, I wanted to begin by talking about the word terrorism for a moment. You see, this term became a common utterance after the 9/11 attacks, but the actual notion of terrorism has been deeply embedded in American history. And the worst offense was and still remains to be the inhumane acts of violence committed against blacks. I believe it was the historian Rayford W. Logan who coined the phrase American Dark Ages to define the era at the end of Reconstruction. You see, it was at this time that the federal government of our country, the good old U.S. of A., restored white supremacist control to the South, which made blacks nothing more than second-class citizens, or what some may even refer to as quasi-slavery. You see, it was at this time that you started to see a heavy influx of lynching cases. And to define lynch is to kill for an alleged offense with or without a legal trial. You see, back in the American Dark Ages, if you will, lynchings were done by practices such as hanging, castration, and maiming. So the violence by police that I see even today towards blacks is nothing more than modern-day lynching. They just traded their ropes for guns. And it's meant for control. It's a method or means of igniting fear. And to eloquently wrap up and explain why, I wanted to go ahead and quote W.E.B. Du Bois as he stated, "The white South feared more than Negro dishonesty, ignorance, and incompetency, Negro honesty, knowledge, and efficiency." You see, there's still this underlying level of resentment towards blacks. And the only reason for that is because blacks are seen as competition. In any game, the easiest way to win is to annihilate the competition. So that's pretty much what has been happening in history and what continues to happen today.
To that, Soul?
I don't have too much more to add because Miss Baba was very thorough in her history breakdown. But I will piggyback off something she said. During Jim Crow, we was definitely treated like second-class citizens, and unfortunately, it seems that we still are being treated as second-class citizens. In this justice system, we're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. But unfortunately, it seems as if you're black, you are guilty until proven innocent, even if you are a victim of a violent crime. One example I want to use before we get into some of these current police cases, I want to give a brief update about Marissa Alexander. She was a black woman in Jacksonville, Florida, that tried to use the stand your ground defense because she was getting attacked by her ex-boyfriend. She ended up shooting a gun into the ceiling as a warning shot. Didn't kill him, didn't even shoot him, but the Florida system still gave her 20 years when they let Zimmerman walk off scot-free and he killed an unarmed black teenager. shows like this is very important because we need to spread the word. Because people got outraged over this and we made some noise, she is getting out of prison in January. So that's very good news. So to segue into some of these current events, I want to talk about Tamir Rice. He was a 12-year-old boy that got killed in Cleveland, Ohio. It's such a tragedy because if you remember when you was 12, I'm sure a lot of us had toy guns that we played with, and it particularly touched me because when I was younger, I had older brothers and sisters out of the house when I was around that age, so a lot of times I used to have games I used to play by myself and have, like, little imaginary things I used to shoot or do whatever with. I'm sure he was probably doing something like that. And if you listen to the dispatcher, whoever called the police on him said that it was probably a toy gun. Now, the cop claimed that he didn't get that information. Well, I don't know if he did or not. All I know is in the video, he gave the kid no warning. As soon as they pulled up, they shot. The kid didn't point his weapon at the vehicle. Nothing. He just pulled up and just shot the kid in cold blood. It's unacceptable. Now, we're going to see how this goes. Hopefully, it goes to trial. Hopefully, this cop get convicted, especially because in his previous stint in another department, the head of that department said that he was on fit for duty. But, the way things going, I wouldn't be surprised if he get off. You never know. But hopefully, he does face justice. But this is nothing new. This system tend to penalize young black boys no matter how old they are. Even though we're talking about a current event, I want to go back to the past just a little bit. It was a young man named George Stinley. He was executed at 14 years old for supposedly killing 2 little girls, which he didn't do. A white family actually did. A white man did it, and their powerful family, South Carolina, covered it up, and they blamed the boy. Well, the state of South Carolina just came out and said that, he didn't do it, and it was the white family that did it. Well, it's too late. A 14-year-old boy lost his life, and his family couldn't even see him in his last moments because they got threatened to be executed and lynched. They didn't leave the area. So this just goes to show you that the tactics might change, but the overall results right now is still the same. And stay in the know. Make sure that you keep informed, because too often when these incidents happen, it's in the media. Once the media stop talking about it, sometimes we tend to forget. Is anybody talking about Sean Bell anymore? I haven't heard nothing about Sean Bell in a long time. That's just one example.
Definitely.
We not hearing about Trayvon Martin as much as we used to.
Nope.
So the overall point is, later on in this show, we're going to debate some solutions, talk about some solutions and how can we become active. Because talking about this is one of the solutions. But we going to need to start getting active and make sure these people didn't die in vain. We keep their names alive and make sure that this stop happening.
All right. Yeah. Word. So that was a good breakdown, Sewell. So just to add on that, how quickly we forget. Just 15 years ago, there was Amadou Diallo. 10 years ago, there were numerous shootings. In the 2000s, there were even things like black men being drugged on the back of pickup trucks in Texas. There's things every year. Every year, there are multiple shootings, multiple deaths, and the majority of the time, mainstream society, the justice system, politicians, and in general, white America, the majority of the time, they feel as if these murders, these killings, but really they're murders, are justified. So what we're definitely going to talk about is why they feel that these things are justified. What gives that black people specifically, people in the urban communities, people in the so-called ghettos, why they feel as if those deaths are justified based on behavioral patterns, things that they feel are typical of someone who may be overly aggressive or might be armed, might be dangerous. Because if you notice, most of these incidences, the majority of these victims are not armed. So we have some cases in which, for example, some white Americans have been armed. We even have some, in which some white Americans have killed entire rooms full of people, or at least shot at these people, and they were taken into custody. You have the Boston bombers, the marathon bombers. The guy was taken into custody. The younger brother was taken into custody after they suspected him of blowing up a marathon. So you have these incidents of people shooting up public places but taken into custody. But then you have countless going back all of history, but more notably going back just 20 years all the way up until now, the end of 2014, of black men being unarmed and killed on the spot because they were supposedly community watchmen or what have you, felt as if his life was in danger.
Alright, so I was just thinking that it's very disheartening to see in mainstream media that when these particular cases come up, they always revert back to the violence that already ensues in the black communities as if that's an excuse for the police action, when in fact the police are supposed to be there to protect and serve. They shouldn't use the violence that's already prevalent in those communities as an excuse to go ahead and kill someone.
Alright, Sue, you got something to add to what Miss Baba just said?
Yeah, I concur with Miss Baba said. The media is a major problem. That's why it's important that we start building our own media outlets, because we can't depend on the mainstream media to get our point of view across. Very rarely do you see intelligent black people to counter some of these points. They might bring a weak black person on that won't aggressively challenge the white supremacist way of thinking. So that's why we got this show going, and there's a whole bunch of other ones that's popping up right now.
Alright, so yeah, that's some good points. And to add to that, when you look at America, specifically white Americans, they have the association of crime. They strongly associate crime with racial minorities. All minorities, specifically Hispanics and blacks, but mainly black Americans. When it comes to violent crime, when it comes to crime that is played on television news programs, newspapers, drug-related crime, violent crime, the over-representation of the media pretty much is crime is seen as black suspects, white victims, despite the statistics saying that the majority of white Americans who are murdered or killed or raped or anything like that, those crimes are usually done by white Americans. And when crimes are done to black Americans and Latino Americans, those crimes typically are done by black and Latino suspects. In a segregated nation, the majority of crime is committed towards people who look like the criminals. And that goes across the board as far as just about every American experience. The majority of the time, a black American is going to have a black experience, a white American is going to have a white experience, and there isn't too much crossover because realistically, we live in a segregated nation in some areas, in most areas. So, everyone's experience going to be different. You know, white Americans are subjected to the same thing as black Americans, which is every child in America is growing up ingrained with the same perceptions of crime and leaning towards blaming most violent crime specifically on black people and the idea that black people are more violent. So, you know, research shows that on average, white people misjudge how much crime is committed by African Americans and Latinos. They always judge it a lot higher than it actually is, and they also misjudge the crimes committed towards white Americans by black Americans much higher than the reality, when the reality is the vast majority, almost all crimes committed against white Americans are done by white Americans. So with whites more strongly associating crime with racial minorities, white people, white politicians, and white people in the criminal justice system are definitely going to be more supportive of harsher penalties for certain crimes, for certain drugs, and for certain groups of people. And they're definitely going to be more lenient for certain crimes and towards certain groups of people, specifically white Americans, when they commit crimes.
Also, I just wanted to add that I think it's imperative to note that even in history, a majority of the lynchings that took place were by white, poor, illiterate, small landowners. And the underlying reason behind it was nothing more than resentment. You see, they saw blacks as competition. And I just feel that even back then, the lynchers seldomly were indicted for the crimes that they committed. And it's the same things that's happening even to this day.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of times the sheriffs and the police officers would be in the photos with them. Ms. Baba is definitely right in that aspect.
Alright, word. So, you know, you guys talked about, you know, how it related to poverty back in the day, you know, with a lot of the victims and a lot of the attackers being poor. But today, pretty much, it's the poor and the black that are mainly the actors, you know, of crime, and also the victims of the unfair criminal justice system and the revolving door of the criminal justice system, which also causes more poverty and in turn more crime. So, you know, most of the theories on crime support the fact that economics plays the largest role in the motivation for criminal behavior. Yeah, that's not to say that poverty and crime has a cause-effect relationship, but it's to say that poverty, lack of resources, being in an environment with low quality living standards, poor schools, weak early childhood education programs, etc., everything that the majority of poor people deal with, and especially black people deal with, in addition to already dealing with stigma, culture, and everything that affects the mentality of the youth and even adults and the urban centers of America. So a lot of the conditions that produce crime are socioeconomic, and those same socioeconomic situations, in the mind of mainstream media, you know, in their mind, it grants them the permission and the justification to paint negative stereotypes and paint the image that law enforcement in turn uses to over-criminalize or over-punish certain segments of our society, specifically black Americans. And these penalties and the treatment that black Americans receive, they're not equal with white Americans. You know, white Americans for similar crimes receive less prison time, lesser punishment. You know, and earlier in the show, Soul mentioned the 14-year-old boy who was killed. You know, he died buy electric chair. The wrist straps, the equipment for the electric chair was not even large enough to fit. It wasn't small enough to fit around his wrist. You know, he was too small for that punishment. You know, we found out 20 years later that he did not commit it, even though most people knew that already. They released the evidence 20 years later. His sister now is in her 80s. You know, she's about to die herself before they even gave that family any kind of, you know, I guess we could say, realistically, because the issues are socioeconomic, a lot of the stigmas stem from economic situations in the history of this nation. Due to the fact that a lot of the issues come from that, that also means that a lot of the solutions need to come from that. Because realistically, until the socioeconomic situation changes, or people have a focus on how to redirect limited resources, crime is still going to be prevalent in minority communities. It's going to be prevalent in poor communities. And until those issues are fixed, mainstream media and anyone who subscribes to white supremacy is going to always feel justified promoting these stigmas and promoting this ideology that leads the police department and the criminal justice to unfairly treat blacks in America.
At the end of the day, it really just boils down to accountability. Nothing is going to change if police officers and people in, you know, those high-power positions continues to get away with killings and things of that nature. If nothing happens to them, if there's no consequence, then nothing is going to change, and that's what needs to ensue in order for us to see the change that we need to see.
Right. One of the things I want to talk about and piggyback off of is accountability, which leads into the solution portion. Now, why do they feel like they can kill us? Why do they feel like they don't even have to indict some of these cops? I think it's because they don't fear any political retribution. I think they believe that they can do this and still keep their jobs and still keep their livelihood. Now, if they were scared, they would lose their position and lose some money. I think the results would be different. I believe we need to form a political pact, a political lobby, real muscle behind it. Not just something like the NAACP or the Urban League and enough shots thrown at them because they can play a role too, but we need something with real political might. Why don't anybody really mess with Jewish people or say anything about Jewish people or do anything to Jewish people in this country? Because they have political might. And one of the reasons they have political might because they have a political lobby. One of them is a T-PAC, a very powerful lobby that have money behind it. They donate to politicians. They donate to the Democrats and Republicans. They got them both in their pocket. Therefore, they no matter who win the election, they know they're going to be taken care of. We need to do something similar. We need to form a black political lobby or a black political pact. We need to gather our resources together and come up with an idea of how to get this started. That could be a major solution, because if Robert McCullin would have did this and we had a pact, we can be donating money right now to make sure he get out of office. And right now in Ferguson, in New York, we need to start backing candidates. And when I mean backing them, make sure they do what we want, because this whole system is ran off political bribery anyway. And we need to get into that game behind. That's one of the solutions. I think that's the main solution right there.
Alright, word. So yeah, nationwide, that's definitely Sewell. I definitely agree with that. Political pacts, we can't really accomplish anything unless we have power. And in this nation, economics is power, group economics. and through group economics and organization, we definitely need to form those black packs in politics. But at a ground level, one of the easiest solutions we can do is community policing. Not only is it one of the easiest, it's one of the most immediate. We could wake up tomorrow as a collective black consciousness in America and start this tomorrow. Because all it takes is us and our willingness to do it. So as far as community policing, internal threats with crime within our community towards each other, that starts at the youth. And by youth, I mean people under the age of 12. Crime is fought generations ago. So if you educate the youth at an early age, every study shows they're that much less likely to commit any kind of crime, more likely to plan out their life better, more likely to make opportunities in places that opportunities have been non-existent for us, or they're just not there for us right now. Opportunities that we've lost or that might have been stolen from us, resources that are not in our community. Certain youth, certain adults who know better, they'll make opportunities for themselves. So everything pretty much goes back to early childhood education. But as far as community policing, we can police our own communities. A lot of communities do this. A lot of Hispanic communities do this. A lot of immigrant communities do this. A lot of Caucasian communities do this. This stems out of some of our current laws. A lot of these so-called stand your ground, granted these laws are aimed at black people, but they're also to protect these people's communities. We're never going to have laws legislatively unless we build a political pact to protect our communities, but we can protect them right now by checking each other. Granted, a lot of this stuff is socioeconomic, but we can do a better job of holding ourselves accountable as well. In addition to that, though, we need to protect ourselves. If you look at all of these situations, these boys, Zimmerman. Initially, Zimmerman, he wasn't the winner in that confrontation. He was the aggressor. He was the attacker. He's the one that hunted down Trayvon. But he initially was not the winner. He didn't have to end up being the one still walking around, still living his life. One thing I want to point out before I get into this is, one of the people, she came a little bit before the civil rights era. It was Ida B. Wells. She was a journalist, a sociologist. She laid the groundwork. She helped lay the groundwork for the civil rights movement. Her main thing she did in her life was document lynchings. What we have going on right now in America in modern times, it really is lynchings. Whether it's killing us or killing our progress, they're lynching us. So that's what Ida B. Wells did. She documented lynchings. And one of her most famous quotes is about community policing and protecting ourselves. She documented every lynching back then, and she said the only case where the proposed lynching did not occur was when the man armed themselves in Jacksonville, Florida, also in Kentucky and other places, and they prevented it. So the only time back in the day where these lynchings did not get out of control is where the men and the women decided to prevent them. What we do today is we wait for them to happen. We don't prepare for them. And then when they do happen, we allow the media to talk about it. we may or may not march and then we forget about them. So and this is before black people had any rights at all. Another time she documented an African American man, he was assaulted and he got away because he knew self-defense. And if you look at gun laws, just like any law in America, you have to look at it from an American point of view and a black American point of view. Like drug laws. Yes, there's drug laws, but then there's the drug war, pretty much responsible for the current criminal justice system, aka the re-enslavement judicially of black Americans. So when you look at gun laws, you have to look at it the same way, the American way and the black way. Because with gun laws, the only reason that the term gun law exists in America was to go against black people after slavery and during the Reconstruction era. It was to prevent black people in America, not black citizens, because we weren't really citizens yet, and we're really almost not really citizens now, but it was to prevent black citizens from carrying weapons. So those are the cases back then, and even if you look at the cases now, there was one just last week or the other week, I believe, I forget which state is in, a boy, I'm not sure if he was committing a crime or not, but whatever the case may be, a police officer approached him when he was not committing a crime, and the end result was a police officer on the ground. The police officer, he's fine. He was shot in the vest. That boy is still alive. Whatever's going to happen beyond this point will be played out in court. Now, I'm not advocating shooting at police or anything like that. It's similar to the Black Panther Party when they carried guns on the street, and when they carried guns into courthouses. They weren't going to war with police. They weren't carrying weapons or practicing self-defense or showing that force to be intimidating. They were showing that force to let others know, outsiders know, that we aren't going to take this. And it's really sad that we would have to resort to those means at that point, that we would have to resort to those means after Reconstruction or even now, but we didn't really ask for that. It's not like black people are on the street now begging for the death of black boys to increase by police, and we're not really asking for police to arm themselves with military grade weapons and equipment. We're not asking for any of this. So in every case, I just want to point out, Ida B. Wells and every black sociologist since, all the way till now, have documented when black people seem their weakest, they're attacked more. And if you think about it, these are criminal acts. These are murders. And if you think about the psychology of a criminal, most criminals are cowards. When a woman's being raped, she's not in a public place. She's not leaving a martial arts class. She's alone somewhere in a parking lot. Or she's a kid and it's a family member. Criminals only attack the vulnerable. With us not having any political power, any economic organization skills, or any self-defense skills for our masses, we're vulnerable. So one of the number one things we need to do is make ourselves not vulnerable. Communities do this in so many different ways. So a Korean community in a random place in California, they may seem weak, but because every shop is owned by them, and even outsiders, white and black Americans, shop with them, their community is powerful. Their dollar does not leave the community, whereas black Americans, our dollar rarely stays in the community. And overall, our communities have no force. We're painted as savages by the media, and we're pretty much painted as weak. There's no repercussion. even every incident that we named today on this show, and whatever incident that will happen next week, there will be no repercussion, realistically. You know, the people in the criminal justice system will still have their jobs. The politicians will still have their jobs. And we still will be where we are. And then that would just reinforce the ideology that black Americans are weak. The only time that we ever gotten freedom was by not being weak. And there is a price of freedom. If you look at places like Haiti, they liberated themselves by not being weak. If you look at the slaves, the black slaves in Iran, you know, what's currently known as Iran right now, in Azan's rebellion, those slaves organized ships, animals, resources, and weapons over the span of 2 nations, thousands of slaves. They communicated and orchestrated that while in chattel slavery. But mainly all these different incidences and cases, the common denominator, the common factor is they weren't displaying weakness. So one solution out of all these solutions, as far as economics and politics and everything, one solution that's immediate is to not show that we are weak and that we are passive. You know, and this is coming from the least violent and the least aggressive amongst us, the sociologists, just like Ida B. Wells and the authors. So we probably should take their advice, because they made the strides to even get us to the point that we could even talk about these things. And so we've been stuck here pretty much since the 60s, in the same spot, being weak. Yeah, so that's my 2 cents on something immediate. So I'm going to close it out like that. Sewell, do you have anything to add in closing, you know, to those points?
Just in general, I believe this was a great discussion, and these are the type of discussions we need to be having every day. We need to be having discussions, and we need to be active in actually acting upon what we're talking about. And we need a full court press. I don't think we can just have one form. We need to constantly be looking for new information, because they change laws on you quickly. One of the things Malik was talking about is self-defense, and I agree, you can never show weakness, but if you do that, you gotta make sure you inform, because one of the things that happened to the Panthers in California, they had those open carry laws. As soon as the Panthers were seen with these guns and marched to the courthouse, the politicians, they changed the laws on them. So they would definitely do that. So you have to be prepared. You have to strategize. Another solution for me is educate the youth, mentor. You can join a mentoring program, but you don't even have to do that. You can start with your family members. You can start with your little cousin that nobody might be paying attention to. Just do what you can do. Start with your circle. Start with family. Start with cousins. Start with nieces. Start with nephews, and go from there.
And for those of you out there who find the recent protests offensive, I just have one thing to say. And in doing so, I wanted to quote Andrew Hawkins of the Cleveland Browns, as he stated, "A call for justice shouldn't offend or disrespect anybody. A call for justice shouldn't warrant an apology." And I think that he summed that up quite perfectly. And this is just a message to our audience. I appreciate you for listening, but I did want to let you know that as we're speaking to you today, our agenda is not to persuade you by any means. Our sole purpose is to spread knowledge and to speak about awareness and consciousness. These are all facts that we're spitting to you today, and I challenge you to do your own research for yourself. The information is out there. changing lives through awareness, consciousness, and knowledge. Stay black.